Hello, hello. Welcome in, everybody. Welcome to day one of Piano Practice Lab, where we are going to design a weekly practice routine to help you accelerate your progress consistently so that you can really move beyond just reading notes and get to that higher level of confident musical expression. Welcome in, everybody. As everybody keeps joining and getting connected to audio, let's go ahead and fire up the chat. Tell me where you're joining from. And tell me how long you have been playing the piano. Let's go ahead and put those things in the chat so that we can get to know each other. I love getting to know faces, getting to know names, and I love for all of you to be able to get to know each other as well as we move through these 4 days together. So let's do it. Say where you're joining from and how long you've been playing the piano. And for those of you that haven't met me before, hello, welcome in. I'm Ashley, and I'm so excited to be here with you. You've got me, and I'll be the one doing a lot of the talking. And then also I have Kat here from my team, and I'm going to just spotlight Kat for just a quick second so that she can also just give a wave and say hello. This is Kat. And Kat's going to drop her email address in the chat. Kat's amazing. She's going to be here supporting all of us and helping if you have questions throughout this experience. If you didn't get your workbook or something's not downloading, reach out to Kat and Kat can help you out with all of that. Kat's a wonderful human. Okay, let's see. I'm going to look at the chat really quick. Yeah, of course. Let's see. Okay, hello to Mary and Nadia from Georgia and Houston, Halifax, David, Newburgh, Oregon. Oh, Henry, how's it going? Former PCC student. And then let's see, Kat has her email address there. Melanie from Utah, Emma from England. Welcome in, everybody. This is so exciting. So before we dive in, I do want to get to know you a little bit. And those of you that haven't attended like a class that I've taught before or a live that I've done like this, I will ask for a lot of typing in the chat on your part. And that's because I love to get to know you. And I really like to have that back and forth between us. I really strive to tailor these experiences specifically to you. I'm going to go over so many mistakes that people make, and I'm going to give you some incredible information that will truly be life-changing to your piano world. But in addition to that, having feedback from you and being able to know where you are and what your struggles are and what your journey has been like is going to be really helpful for me to know, what questions to answer and just to create that connection with all of us. So before we dive in, let's continue to fire up the chat. I would like you to let me know how you found Piano Practice Lab. Did you find it through my YouTube channel? Do you know me? Or did you find it through someone else? Because this time around, there were some other people that jumped on board with Piano Practice Lab and started sharing the information. And so I'd love to know how you found Piano Practice Lab. And also, we're going to take things a little bit deeper. And I want you, and you can think about this for a second before you type, I want you to let me know in the chat why you started playing the piano. Not just how long you've played, but what got you started on this journey. I know a lot of people that I encounter took lessons as children, and then they had a really big long break, and now they're coming back to it. Or perhaps you didn't play and you found it as an adult, or you finally decided to dive in and do that thing that you've always been wanting to do. But I'd love for you to tell me why you play the piano. Go ahead and type that in the chat, and I'm going to give you a Now, the other thing that I want you to think about and that I want you to share with me in the chat is that if you were to remove all limitations, so let's just say like right now I have a little magic wand and I'm going to wave it over all of you, wherever you are in the world, and I'm removing every limitation. What is your biggest piano dream? Like the biggest aspiration, the thing that you're maybe even like a little bit afraid to admit to people or even afraid to say it out loud? Let's type those in the chat. And I'm going to check in with the chat. Love the music and the love of the challenge of learning. Playing La Campanella. Oh, that's such a good one. Loved the piano since you were a small child and you've always wanted to play. Oh, I'm so glad that you're doing it now. I'm glad that you are actually diving in and doing that for yourself. That's amazing. Let's see. People started playing guitar, changed to piano. Oh, this is amazing. The challenge of learning. Yes, the challenge of learning is like no other when it comes to piano, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and I want you now to think about So that biggest aspiration or that biggest goal that I just asked you about, if I had a magic wand and I could wave, what would it mean for you if you could reach that dream like right now or in the very near future? How would that change your life? How would that change your piano world? How would that change things for you? Let's go ahead and type those answers in the chat. Ooh, to be a concert pianist, Janet. That's awesome. And just don't mind me. I'm going to just read in the chat for a second. Cool. Committed to learning. I love that. Composing. Have always had music in my life. Oh, these are so beautiful. Play more often in public. Very cool. Connecting with emotions. Yes. Sit down and get in the zone of playing music. Touching heaven with your hands. Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that so much. Okay. These are really, really beautiful. Keep typing. If you haven't answered it, go ahead and keep typing. Just take your time with those questions. I know when I ask those questions, for some people, the answer isn't like immediately obvious. So take your time. And as we go through today, feel free to continue sharing or continue answering those questions in the chat. I'll review them one more time for the people that just came in. The questions were, why did you start playing the piano? What are your biggest piano goals and aspirations? And what would it mean for you if you could reach them like right now or in the very near future? As I mentioned at the beginning, I'll ask you to type in the chat a lot. So get your fingers fired up. You're going to get some good finger exercises today in the chat. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So just to review, we are designing a weekly practice routine. We are going to help you accelerate your progress consistently. A lot of the people that come into my community like have little short spurts of progress, right? Occasionally they have a really wonderful practice session, or occasionally there are weeks or months where they're making a ton of progress. But I want you to get to the point that you are making that progress consistently, because when you can consistently make progress and consistently be accurate, then you get to the point where you can really move beyond the notes and reach that deeper level of confident musical expression. That's when you start to feel a little bit more free in your playing. And when you feel like you can really genuinely connect to the music and to your emotions and express that through the music. Okay. And in every single thing that I do, that is my goal. Right? I talk a lot about how to practice smarter, not harder. I focus a lot on the strategy and the tactical practice, tips and resources that you can use to practice better. Because when you change the way that you practice, you change the way that you sound. And if you make better use of your practice time, then you get to that ultimate goal of being able to connect with the music and play expressively and with that true sense of emotion so much faster and so much easier. Okay. So when I say the words confident musical expression, I'm really curious what that means to you, because I know I just kind of described what it means to me, but what does that mean to you? Go ahead and type that in the chat. If you were to have confident musical expression, what does that mean in your world and on your piano playing journey? Now, as you type those things, I'm going to continue to take us through what we're going to go through today so that we can stay on time. But this 4-day experience, this piano practice lab, is really for you if you are the type of piano player or teacher, and both, that want to be able to express yourselves musically, but you are experiencing some roadblocks. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit like what those roadblocks might look like. So you sit down to practice, you know you need to practice, right? And you go to the piano and you put in the time, but you're stalled by things like repeated mistakes or sections of music that you just can't get past a certain level. Perhaps you're learning a piece and it's like you can play the first page really, really, really well, but there's that spot in the music that when you get to it, every time you dread it because you know it's going to trip you up and you know it's going to cause issues. This is a perfect experience for you if you struggle with consistency. And that can mean a variety of things. That can mean consistency getting to the piano. That can mean consistency with the quality of the practice that you're doing, or that can mean consistency of like your technique or your rhythm skills or something more specific. If you can't play through a piece without pausing or without stopping, then you're in the right place. We're going to talk about some strategies that will help you move through that. And if you have that feeling or that experience where you practice and you sit down at the piano, you put in the time, you put in the effort, but the next day, or like a couple days after that, you go to the piano and you're like, why can't my hands remember what I was doing? Why can't they do what I was doing yesterday? And if you have that feeling over and over and over again, then this is a great place for you to be. We're going to talk about some strategies and some ways that you can overcome that. Okay. So type yes in the chat, just yes. If any of that resonated with you, if any of what I just said, you heard and you were like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds a little bit familiar. Okay. Awesome. 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 Then you are all in the right place. This is great. Now, when I ask you about your biggest piano dream or aspiration, I want you to tell me in your own words, in your own opinion, what is your assessment? What is the biggest thing standing in the way of you reaching that? Okay. What is, if you had to distill it down to like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 things, what is the biggest thing standing in your way from reaching that? Let's go ahead and type that in the chat. Now, I'm just going to make sure real quick. I'm going to mute all of you if you don't mind, just so we don't get any weird echoes and just so that we don't have the spotlight change to other people. Okay, so things standing in the way are confidence, coordinating hands, consistent practice, don't believe you're good enough, time and mindset, performance anxiety, time, lack of better patience. This is amazing. Oh my gosh, you are all incredible. Thank you for being so honest. It's not always to admit like what the real reason or the real things are that are standing in our way, but I'm so inspired and impressed by your vulnerability and your honesty. Okay, we're going to talk about all of these things. This is really great. Frustration with yourself. Yep, we're going to touch on all of those. So in our time together, we're going to solve for some problems that we've already touched on a little bit this morning. So the way that you structure your practice sessions and the way that you approach pre-planning your practice routine lays a solid foundation for what you do during your practice time. And this foundation can either be very solid and structurally sound, or not, right? And if not, if you don't have that solid foundation, then anything that you try to build on top of it is going to be pretty shaky and pretty rickety. And we don't want that. I want you to have that solid foundation so that you can start to build on top of that solid foundation, and your routine and the way that you practice holds everything up and really helps you go to that next level. When you have a solid foundation of an efficient and effective practice routine, then we can really start to focus on how you practice, because the way that you practice is the way that you sound. So if you sit down and you're repeating things and there's lots of mistakes, and you're repeating things and there's lots of mistakes, that's how it's going to sound when you play through your pieces, right? If however you sound when you practice is how you will sound when you play. So if you're inaccurate, if you lack consistency, it's most likely because that's how you're practicing. And this week, we're going to talk about how to change that. I want to give you some concrete practice methods that you can use to ensure that you're practicing in ways that leads you to accuracy, consistency, and musicality. Now, one thing that I want you all to understand as we dive into these 4 days together is the difference between proactive and reactive practice. And I'm going to give you an example of a couple of months ago, I was working with a student, and, you know, oftentimes if people come to a class and they're like, I'm really struggling with this, the very first question that I will ask them is, okay, tell me how you practiced it. Because that's going to shed a lot of light on where the issue really lies. Because pretty immediately when they start to describe how they're practicing, it's clear that we could take a different approach or a different method and that we could get them much better results. And so I was working with a student, Jamie, and he was explaining to me that like he couldn't get past this one part. He was working on a Brahms intermezzo and he couldn't get past this one part. And I was like, okay, tell me how you're practicing. And he started to describe how he was practicing. And he said, okay, well, I sit down. And mind you, he's been playing with instruction from me for years. So he's already very well versed on how to practice and what the best methods are and things like that. And he says, I sit down and I turn on my practice timer and I pull out my practice journal and I play through the piece. And then I take a mental note of whatever went wrong in the piece. And then I go back and I practice that. And, you know, at first, like on first hearing, that sounds okay, right? Like, and maybe some of you hear that and you're like, yeah, that sounds really smart. That's how I practice. But this is a really good example of reactive practice, because what he's doing is he's playing through the piece first without giving much thought to what he's doing. So he's just sitting down at the piano. He's not really mentally preparing. He's not setting himself up for success. And he's just playing through the piece. And then he's reacting to the mistakes he made in the past. So he's then crafting his routine and deciding what methods he's going to use based on the mistakes he made in his cold performance of the piece. And that is reactive practice, where you're reacting. And the thing that always pops into my head is it's kind of like this image of a person that's like running around putting out fires, right? They have an extinguisher and they're like trying to put out all of these little fires after the fact. When we practice proactively, what we do is we sit down and we take a few minutes, either before we start to practice or even the day before, or even, the week before. And we think about what are the things in the piece that we know are a problem. What is the next confidence milestone that we're working towards? And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. And what is the best way to get there? So how can we practice proactively so that we are preventing so many fires from being started? Because if we're always reacting, there's always a lot of fires to put out. But if you practice proactively, you have less fires to begin with, right? And so there's less to react to because you're laying that solid foundation. So type in the chat, which one describes your current piano practice? I see Melissa already says, guilty. Are you practicing proactively, where you're thinking about what you're doing before you do it? Or are you practicing reactively, where you're putting out fires after the fact? And it's okay. It might look like both at different times, right? You might have times where you're doing both. And most people do both. I'm a pro. I love it. A mix of both, but mostly reactive, sometimes proactive. Yeah. And oftentimes I find that adults will often have a little mix of both, where sometimes they know how to be proactive and sometimes they only know how to be reactive. But we're going to get you much more into the proactive zone. Okay. That's where I want you all to be, so that you have less fires to put out. You have that solid foundation. And instead of trying to put out like 15 or 30 fires every practice session, you are proactively practicing. And then maybe you have one fire that you address the next day in your practice routine. Okay. Now, if you haven't been to a class or a live session of mine before, it's important to know that throughout these 4 days together, we are going to be very encouraging of each other. We are going to cheer each other on, and you're all going to get to know each other a little bit. I'm going to have you do some accountability posts in the Facebook group at the end of each day. And in addition to showing up fully and to participating and doing your accountability post, I want you to comment on other people's posts. I want you to chime in the chat and encourage each other and connect with each other, because magic really happens when you can recognize that you're not alone on this journey, right? If you are struggling with something, I promise you, you are not the only person that struggles with that problem. Even if you think it's because of your age or your level or the genre of music that you're trying to play or your history with a teacher that told you that you couldn't do it. I promise you, you are not alone in that. There are other people here with us today and other people that will watch the replays that have been on that same journey as you. So encourage people in the chat. I'm going to encourage all of you. I'm going to cheer you on because I know that fundamentally you all have the skills and the ability to reach your piano goals. I know you have that ability. It's just you might need some information to help you get there. So let's go ahead and dive a little deeper into the framework of what we're going to do. The way that we're going to do this throughout these 4 days together, it might be a little bit different than what you've seen before, because what we are going to cover applies to any level of piano player or piano teacher and any genre of music. I'm not really concerned that much with what you're practicing. There's a lot of teachers out there and a lot of people that will say you cannot learn this piece until you've done X, Y, and Z. And I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey when it comes to that, because I think that, you can choose your path. And as long as you have the strategies to make that path as effective and efficient as possible, you're going to reach that goal. It's just a matter of being a little bit flexible with the timeline. Okay. And so what we're going to cover is going to work for any level, any genre. And I want to focus on where you're going and how you're going to get there, because that is where the gold is. When we stop asking questions like, well, what exercises do I need? Or what pieces do I need? And we start focusing on how do I actually get to that point that I'm trying to get to? That's where the gold is. Okay. And that's where that effective framework lies that we're going to talk about. This is when accuracy and consistency and musicality really start to become an inevitable endpoint of your practice time that you're already putting in. So let's close our eyes for a second. And I want you to just imagine a reality where you sit down at the piano and every single time you go to the piano to practice, you know exactly where you're going and you know how to get there. You know what methods you're going to implement. You know you have those methods and that little roadmap to get there. Okay. And when I say you know where you're going, I don't just mean that you're going to eventually be able to play the Moonlight Sonata. I mean that you truly know where you're going and exactly what little milestones you need to hit along the way in order to play the Moonlight Sonata. You know what milestones to hit, and you also know how to get there, right? You know which practice methods are going to get you to that next milestone to be able to play the Moonlight Sonata in a way where it has the level of beauty that it fully deserves, right? So how would that change your piano journey? If you knew like what milestones you needed to hit along the road to your ultimate goal, and if you knew what practice methods to use to get you to those next milestones. Let's go ahead and type that into chat. How would it change things? Because this is where the big transformation happens. This is where you really start to think of things differently, and you really start to master the art of learning at the piano and the art of playing with confident musical expression. When you have a roadmap with a breakdown of those milestones, and you have your tool belt that is full of practice methods that you know you can plug in and use to get you to those different milestones from point A to point B. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Smoother, straighter line. It would accelerate your progress. Exactly. Yes, it gives you hope. It would be highly motivating. More comfortable playing in front of other people. Yes, definitely. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about what it's going to take. So I want you to make the most of this time, because we're going to have these 4 days together, which on the one hand is a lot of time, and on the other hand is no time at all. And so I want you to fully show up every single day with an open mind, ready to learn. Okay. I want you to commit. And this is a really big one. I want you to commit to coming to each of these 4 days. And if you have something, or if you're watching the replay right now and you know you can't make it to one of the days or to a couple of the days, I want you to fully commit to watching the replay and to implementing the things that I'm going to tell you, because a lot of transformation is possible when you simply make a commitment to yourself and you keep that commitment. Right? And I know that all of you know this in various parts of your life. And you probably even know this because there's probably been times of your life where you're like, I'm going to practice every day for this amount of days, and you accomplish it. And at the end, you feel so good. And it's not even necessarily because you got some big result or because you reached the goal. It's because you honored that commitment that you made, and you did the thing that you said that you were going to do. And so if you commit to coming every single day, and you commit to trying the things that I ask you to try, first of all, it's going to wildly open your piano world. I know that's going to happen. But the other thing that's going to happen is it's going to help you honor that part of yourself that is deep down, that really wants to change the way that you play and change the way that you practice and wants more from your piano experience. I want you to keep a growth mindset. And I talk a lot about this in my live classes, and I talk a lot about this with the members of Casual the Confident Piano Player and in my YouTube content. It's so important for you to understand and fundamentally believe that you have what it takes to reach your goal. You might need more information, you might need practice, you might need to make some slight adjustments, but you have what it takes. That is a different mindset than a fixed mindset that tells you like, I can't do this because I'm too old. Or I can't do this because I don't have the amount of practice time that I need to do it. Or I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. Anytime you go into that line of thinking that I can't do this, you're moving into a fixed mindset. And every human oscillates between the two. But I want you to try to stay in a growth mindset, not only for these 4 days together, but for your piano journey period, because it's going to make things so much easier for you along the way. I want you to talk to yourself kindly. And one of the exercises that I know some of you, because I know there's some familiar names and faces in here, I know some of you have done with me, is I want you to think about the very best teacher that you ever had. It might have been someone in grade school, might have been a piano teacher, it might have been someone at a church. Think of the very best teacher you ever had. And think about the kinds of things that they would say to you and the way that they would encourage you. And that is how I want you to talk to yourself when you play the piano, when you practice throughout these 4 days together and beyond. I want you to channel the voice of that kindest, best, favorite teacher that you've ever had and talk like them. Okay? Now, we already talked about encouraging others in the community and participating in the chat and doing the homework. Okay, doing the homework and the accountability posts every single day is going to ensure that you get the most out of this experience. And then the last thing is I want you to make sure that you ask for help if you need it. Okay, so make sure that if you aren't understanding something, type in the chat. If I miss your question in the chat, tag me in the Facebook group and ask the question again. Kat put her email address in the chat. It's info@casualtheconfidentpianoplayer.com. If you have any questions, you can also reach us via email, but make sure that you ask for help if you need it. If you feel like there's a piece of the puzzle that's missing for you, ask for help. Okay. Now I am going to quickly talk, we're going to dive into the mistakes and how to ensure you aren't making these mistakes here in just a second. But for those of you that are new, that haven't known me for very long and that don't know a lot about who I am, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been playing the piano since I was 4 years old. I went through all the way through childhood and all the way through college and obviously through today. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in piano performance. And throughout that entire journey, since I was an adult, I have been teaching. And that has looked in a variety of different ways. I've taught at the college level, I've taught private lessons, I've taught group classes. I now teach exclusively online to people all over the world. It's looked very differently along the way, but my goal has always been to help people get that higher goal of expressing themselves musically, of really deeply being able to connect with themselves and the music and express all of that through the music. Now, there was a point in my story when I almost considered quitting. And it's because, so when I was younger and when I was reaching the time where it was a time for me to make a choice about what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted to go to college for specifically. And I was at this point in my piano journey where I've always loved music, right? I did it since I was a little kid. I didn't ever quit, but I got to a point where I felt like I was wasting my time. I would sit down and practice and I would play my pieces over and over again. And when I listened to music, I could feel so much at such a deep level. And I wanted to be able to do that in my piano playing. And I felt like I could do that sometimes. Like sometimes I could achieve that level of depth and quality in my piano playing, but I couldn't do it consistently and I couldn't do it with all of the pieces. And I would go to my lessons and I would come home and I would play through my pieces over and over, which is kind of what I thought practicing was. And my piano playing just didn't reflect the quality and the depth that I really wanted and longed for. And I made the choice to go to school for music, which was a tough choice because I wasn't really convicted in it. I was like, I don't know if this is what it looks like. I don't know if this is what I want to do. But I'm really glad that everything changed because I connected with a teacher that taught me practice methods and that taught me how to practice proactively so that my practice became unlike anything I had ever experienced before. All of a sudden, I was practicing for a lot longer times, but I was getting way bigger results during those practice sessions. All of a sudden, the quality of the results that I was getting were increasing significantly. And fast forward to now, I realized along that journey that it wasn't just me that didn't know how to practice and that didn't know how to get to that level of depth and that level of expression. It's actually most people, because most people aren't focusing on how to practice. And so I wasn't alone in this. A lot of my teachers were amazing humans. Like when I think of my favorite teachers, all of my piano teachers pop up. They were such incredible human beings and incredible teachers, but a lot of them would give me lists of things to fix, right? I'd go to my lesson and I'd play for them and they'd say, okay, you need to fix this, 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 and this. And then I'd go home and I wouldn't really have an idea of like how to actually fix those things or how to practice to fix them. So I'd do my best. I'd kind of like play through the sections that they talked about repeatedly, but I didn't know how to fix. And that's a lot of what's out in the world, right? Like that's a lot of the information that's out there about piano. It's about like what you should practice, what you should be focusing on. But there's not a lot of people that are taking it deeper to how to actually practice in order to fix the thing you're trying to fix. And so this is where my passion lies, not in giving you a long list of things of like, you need to fix this, 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 and this, but actually sitting with you and watching you practice and saying, okay, this is how you can do it better. This is how you can practice this section to get the exact result that you want. This is how you can practice to get to that higher level of musicality. And so my philosophy when it comes to playing the piano musically is about a lot more than just your hands. Okay, it's a lot more than just your fingers. I believe that in order to reach that true level of musical expression, you have to address the head work, which are the things that you do before you sit down at the piano, right? Your mindset, which we've already talked about a little bit today, and pre-planning your practice routine, which we already talked about a little bit today and which we're going to dive deeper into. I believe it's about the handwork. Yes, of course, your hands are involved. And that's really knowing how to practice and knowing how to implement the proper technique so that you can utilize your body in a way that gets the sound that you want out of the piano. And then, and this is the step that a lot of people miss, it's about the heart work. It's about actively showing up and connecting with yourself and connecting with the music and connecting with others. And that seems really ambiguous. It's like, well, how the heck? There are actual ways that you can practice doing the heart work. Now, really all of these three areas are related, right? They feed each other. And so if you're doing the head work and you're doing the hand work, it's going to make the heart work a lot easier. If you're practicing the heart work, it's going to make the other areas easier. So they don't exist in separate boxes, but it's really when all three of those things come together that you can reach that higher level of musical expression. Now, the way that we do that and the way that we break that down into like, okay, so how do I actually practice is by going through a confidence roadmap. And the confidence roadmap is the name that I gave to basically all of the milestones, the confidence milestones that you have to hit in any piece in order to get to that confident musical state. And this is where so many people get lost because, first of all, the process of learning a piece from beginning to end is not always clear because there's a lot of different levels of pieces. There's a lot of different genres of music, and there's a lot of different piano players like you out there that have different experiences and different journeys that you're bringing to the process. But regardless of all of that, there are just certain milestones that you need to hit to get to that true level of confidence. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about how the way I teach is that it doesn't really matter what your background is or what your level is. And my favorite part of the way that I teach is that it doesn't really matter what your goals are either, right? I saw in the chat that someone wants to be a concert pianist. I saw in the chat that someone has goals of really just being able to play for themselves a little bit more confidently and for their own enjoyment. And maybe your goal is just to be able to play one piece for a family member or for an event. It doesn't really matter because the framework of how you get from point A, which is wherever you are right now, to point B, which is that confident level of musical expression, is the same. Okay. And I love that. I love that so much because it simplifies it for everyone and it makes it digestible and it makes it so that you can learn that framework and apply it to anything. And you can do that over and over and over again and get the same results. So I have an online quiz that a couple hundred people have taken, and I love to look at the results of the quiz, and because I'm a little bit of a data geek, and just kind of see like what people are saying and what the results are. And one of the questions is about a practice routine. And one of the questions is about playing musically. And when I looked at the data for the questions about playing musically, I found that 75% of piano players know that they want to reach that level of musical expression, but they don't know how to get there. Okay. And that just goes to show that it's not your fault, right? It's not because there's something inherently wrong with you. It's just because there's a lack of information and it seems really confusing to get to that higher level. So type in the chat, yes, if that sounds like you. If you're like, oh yeah, if I took that quiz, that's what I would say too. Like, I know I want to get there, but I don't know how to get there. Type yes in the chat if that sounds familiar. Okay. And then from that same quiz, when I ask about a practice routine, only 25% of people have a planned practice routine. So type in the chat, yes, if you are one of those people that does not have a planned practice routine. Go ahead and type yes in the chat. Okay, cool. Awesome, awesome. And those of you that do have a practice routine, that's okay. We're going to refine it. We're going to change it. We're going to make it even more effective and more efficient. So this week, the main things are pre-planning, that proactive practice, right? Of thinking about what you're going to do before you sit down at the piano, and then how you practice, what you actually do once you're sitting down at the piano. And so before we dive in and we talk about how to actually proactively plan the routine, we're going to go over the mistakes that people make. And it's okay if you see yourself in some of these or all of these. It's really helpful to know what not to do, because it helps answer a lot of your questions before we dive into what we are going to do. So let's talk about those mistakes and how you can avoid them, okay? And I want you to quickly type in the chat. If you do have a practice routine, go ahead and type it in the chat. Like, what are the things that you do in your practice routine? It can be just in a couple of sentences. So when I'm talking about pre-planning or proactively planning, I use those two terms kind of interchangeably. I don't just mean like how long you sit down. It's great. If you're like, I know that I have 30 minutes to commit to the piano every single day, that's great. If you have a time limit on it, that's awesome. But I mean, we're going into a lot more detail than just how much time you're spending practicing. What I mean by pre-planning or proactively practicing is you know which days you're practicing. And this can be set on a weekly basis. This can be set on a monthly basis, but you know which days you're going to the piano. You know how long you practice each day. you know what your goals are or what the confidence milestones are for each practice session. Meaning, like, you know, okay, the next point that I need to get this piece to is this. And you know how you are going to practice to get there. And you have it organized into timed out chunks. Okay. Don't leave the Zoom meeting right now. Stick with me. Because most people aren't doing this, right? Most people have some of that. And so if you recognize like, oh yeah, I know how long I'm practicing. I know what days I'm practicing. That's amazing. You're already part of the way there. But we're going to take it to that next level of depth where we're going to say, okay, specifically, what is the next milestone that you need to hit with this piece on that roadmap of confident musical expression? And how are you going to practice in this next chunk of time to get to that milestone? Okay. And so the biggest mistakes that people make with practice routines is, first of all, not that level of detail, right? They kind of surface level say like, this is how long I'm going to practice, or like, I have an idea of what I'm going to do, but they don't think more deeply about it. Another mistake people will make is just not making one. Right. And some of you said, yes, you don't have a routine. And so I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm so glad that we're going to get you a routine, because that already in and of itself is going to completely change the way that you practice and make it way more effective. If you think about pre-planning, I know I gave you that example of the proactive and the reactive practice with Jamie, but another example, an analogy that I like to use a lot is the idea of you deciding to go somewhere. So let's say right now, we are all going to go to France, okay? And if anybody from France is joining, then you're gonna go somewhere else in France, but we're all gonna go to France. And let's say that I'm like, okay, awesome, cool, let's get up. We're gonna leave this Zoom meeting and we're all gonna walk out our door and we're gonna go to France. We would likely encounter roadblocks along the way, because if I walked out of my door right now, I just left this Zoom meeting and walked out my door, I wouldn't have my passport with me. I maybe would have forgotten to grab my car keys to get to the airport. I don't have a plane ticket. And so I would encounter roadblocks along the way that would prevent me from getting to my destination. And the same is true when you practice. If you simply just sit down and you think, I want to play the Moonlight Sonata, and you just start playing, you are going to encounter so many roadblocks that you likely will not get there. Whereas if you were to take a few minutes and say, okay, hang on, let me jump on Expedia. I'm going to buy my plane ticket. I'm going to grab my car keys. I'm going to grab my passport. That took me 10 minutes, and now I can likely make it to France. And the same is true with your piano practice. Let me sit down. I'm going to think about it for a second. Okay, this is where I'm going. Okay, this is how I'm going to practice to get there. Okay, now I'm going to encounter a lot less roadblocks. Okay, so that is the importance of pre-planning or proactively thinking about your practice versus just diving in and doing it on the fly. Now, a lot of times people will get caught up on the amount of time that they're practicing. And there is, oh, I see in the chat, someone says, I love France. Amazing. I am going to go sometime soon. I have not been. Getting caught up with the amount of time. So you don't need a ton of time. And in fact, the amount of time you practice doesn't matter. I'm going to say it. I'm going to upset some people, but the amount of time you practice doesn't matter. What matters is that you pick a time that you know you can consistently commit to. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 5 hours. The amount of time matters significantly less than your ability to consistently get to the piano and practice. So don't get caught up on the amount of time that you're going to practice. I always say, and we'll talk more about this, estimate low so that you have a higher success level. Okay. So pick an amount of time that you're like, I can for sure commit that amount of time to the piano. And then you're likely to have a higher success level. And we'll talk more later about why that's so important. Once you have that consistency, then you can build. You can always increase the amount of time that you're doing later. But if you're not practicing at all, or you're having trouble getting to the piano with any sort of consistency, we're not going to pick a huge time goal that doesn't make sense, that's not realistic. Now, another huge mistake, and this is a really, really, really big one, is that people try to squeeze in way too much to their practice time. They try to do way too much, and more is never better. Because when you try to squeeze too much in, your likelihood of having success goes down. And it creates this awful cycle where you sit down at the piano and you try to accomplish a lot. And because you set out to accomplish so much, you don't accomplish it. And then you feel a lot of things, but just in the simplest form, you feel a little bit bad. You feel a little bit bad that you didn't reach your goal. And so then that kind of informs how you go to the piano the next day. So you set another big goal and it's unrealistically large and you don't hit it. So you feel a little bit bad. And this snowballs, right? And if you go to the piano and you're setting these huge goals and you're never accomplishing them, it's like psychologically, it's not good for the learning process. It makes the journey really difficult. It makes it hard for you to see the improvements that you have made, and it makes it hard for you to make progress. So always think about doing less with the amount of time you're practicing, with the goals that you're setting, and with the amount that you're going to accomplish during your practice time. Less is better. I always joke around, like, the worst case scenario, if you practice a section of music that's too small, or you create a goal that's too small, or it feels easy, you're going to reach it, right? That's the worst case scenario. You reach it and you have time left over. And that's actually a really great thing. So adults have a really hard time going slower or doing a smaller section or setting a smaller goal, but it works in your favor, because worst case scenario, you hit it really quickly and then you have more practice time and you can do whatever you want. Okay. So less is better. Less is more. Now, the other thing that happens, and one of the mistakes in the ways of thinking about pre-planning or proactively practicing, is a lot of people will say, like, doesn't a practice routine make it really inflexible? Like, I don't want a practice routine to help me, like, I don't want it to feel rigid. I don't want it to feel so strict that it takes the joy out of it, or it takes like that spontaneity or that feeling out of it. And the cool thing about a routine, excuse me, is that it actually provides a lot more flexibility, because a little bit of what I was talking about, when you have a routine and you set goals that are achievable, you start to reach those goals faster. You start to get better at creating the routine. It takes you less time. You start to get better at practicing. You reach your goals faster. And all of a sudden, it actually provides you with a lot more flexibility. You also, once you have that consistency, you have a chance to create routines as backups. So there's always like your main routine that you're going to try to be consistent with. But of course, you're going to have weeks in your life or seasons in your life where things change, where you don't have as much time because things are stressful at work, or where your kids have a lot of activities, or your students have recitals and competitions coming up. So there will be times where you need to make adjustments to the routine. And when you have a routine, you can actually have routines for other scenarios and other situations. You can have like your I'm exhausted and I don't feel like practicing routine. You can have your I only have 2 minutes today routine. You can have your this week or this month is extra stressful and busy, and I really just want to find the joy in music routine. So you can actually create routines for all of the various circumstances. And that allows you to keep track of, like, when am I practicing in a way that's truly moving me to my goals? And when am I implementing the other routines in those various parts of my life to be more flexible, to allow for more humanness and more of that whole life experience? So a routine actually makes you more flexible, okay? Because it allows you that flexibility to make the adjustments in seasons of life when things change. Now, another thing we'll talk about is that you need to plan breaks. And this is a big mistake that people make, is they don't plan the breaks into their practice routine. Ideally, you are never sitting for more than 10 to 20 minutes at one go of it without taking at least a break with your eyes, right? When you focus at a high level, which is ideally what you're doing when you practice, that high level of focus cannot carry on for hours and hours and hours without a break. It's just not possible. And it's actually been proven. I should look up an actual study that I can cite here, so don't quote me on this, but you can go Google it if you want. You just simply cannot focus at a very high level for longer than about 10 to 20 minutes without taking a break. So I always recommend, and we'll dive into this when we start planning your routine, that people plan their practice routine in 10 to 20 minute chunks. And then have at least a 30-second break where, if nothing else, you're at least like turning on the bench and looking at something farther away to reset your eyesight. But ideally, in those 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you're like getting up and doing some stretches, taking some deep breaths, doing some shoulder rolls, like changing position for a minute, getting your body out of piano position so that you can find it again without tension, and so that you can come back to that like relaxed state and that high level of focus. Mindless practice will not get you anywhere, right? Sitting there and being like, oh, I need to fix this. And you're making mistakes. And so you're like drilling down harder and you're like, I'm just going to keep going until I get it. And then an hour has passed and you're like glazed over and you're frustrated. That's not helpful. Okay. We need breaks and we need that high level of focus. Okay. The last thing that is a common mistake is just confusion, right? Like, people just look at their practice routine and they're like, well, I could do it this way, or I could do it this way, or I could do it this way, or is this the best way, or is this the best way, or is this the best way? By the end of the 4 days together, you're going to have some really great ideas of how to get out of that confusion. But also at the end of the day, even if you don't know, just make a choice. Okay, just pick one. Because when it comes to a practice routine, there's going to be variables about you specifically and your unique brilliance and individuality. And so you just have to make a choice and try it. And then you can make adjustments, right? You can kind of like say, okay, well, that didn't work. Maybe I'll try this other option. Okay, that didn't work. Maybe I'll try this other option. And you can tweak and refine as you go. Because like I said, having a routine is flexible. And part of that flexibility is making adjustments as you grow and as you learn more. And so don't get stuck in that space of like, I'm confused. I don't know what the best way is. Just try a way and you'll get more information and then you can go forward from there and make adjustments. The best practice routines will grow and morph and evolve as you grow and morph and evolve. Okay, so I'm going to take a second and look at the chat really quickly. You will usually walk around the house out of frustration for your breaks. Well, I hope, Melissa, that you're like deep breathing during those breaks to come back from your frustration. Let's see. How do you balance including scales, exercises like hand and repertoire without it feeling like too much? That's a great question. And we're going to dive more into that. But a lot of it is recognizing, well, first of all, I don't always recommend a lot of exercises. Exercises are really only helpful if you know exactly how you're practicing them, what the purpose of them is, and if you're approaching them with totally proper technique. And so I would say you're not like, I've never assigned exercises for a maximum of 5 minutes a day, scales or exercises. I would recommend that you alternate. So you're not doing scales and exercises every day. You have like, you know, one day you're doing scales, the next day you're doing exercises, and that way you can keep it within that 5-minute time routine. And that's how you approach a large amount of repertoire in general. If you don't have a lot of time, is you make rotations, right? So you might actually have an A plan and a B plan, and you might rotate them on off days so that you can address everything that you want to address in the amount of time that you have. And we'll dive more into that as we go through, you know, the next 3 days together. And yes, Mary, thank you. I do have a couple YouTube videos about hand, and one just came out either yesterday or last week, I don't even remember, about like 5 ways to make sure that you're really making the most of those exercises. So that would be a good thing to check out too. Okay, so if you pre-plan and if you are proactive in the ways that we're going to talk about, some really cool things start to happen. You start to have a lot more motivation. And this is because you don't have the mental hurdle of thinking about what you're going to do right as you're about to do it. Because it's actually a lot to expect of ourselves to say, like, not only am I going to sit down and practice right now, but I'm also going to come up with an entire action plan of what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it right as I'm about to do it. That's a lot for our brain to do. And those are actually 2 really different tasks, right? To think about what we're going to do and then to also actionably take action and do it. Those are 2 different mindsets and 2 different parts of the brain that we have to use. And so when you are pre-planning either the day before or the week before, you have a lot more motivation because there's less of a barrier to entry, right? You don't get caught and stuck in the phase of like, well, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? What's the best thing to do? You already know what you're going to do. It's like having that plane ticket already purchased and the keys already in your hand and the passport already in your bag. You're already ready to go. And so all you have to focus on is how to get there, as opposed to also making all the plans of what you're going to do in order to get there. You also start to be more efficient because when you do it repeatedly, you get to hone in on the process and refine the process. So don't just take what we're going to talk about and do it once. That would be the biggest mistake of all. Do it, commit to it for at least these 4 days together, because you'll get a little bit better at it every single day. And there's little understandings and little aha moments that I can't even begin to describe to you that you will have just through the act of doing it every single day. You're going to become more effective because part of what we're going to do in the planning is we're also going to check in after your practice and see what worked and see what didn't work. And so you'll start to notice patterns about yourself. You're going to start to notice things and tendencies that you have, and then you can make adjustments for those things as you go forward. You're also going to start to see your progress a lot more clearly. And this is a big one because we all need to be celebrating success more, right? And I don't care what the size of the success is. I don't care if you've learned an entire piece and you can play it through beginning to end beautifully. That's amazing. I also care equally if you spent 5 minutes drilling half of a measure and now you can play it accurately. That is a huge win. And so when you actually are keeping track of what you're doing and checking in with how it went, you start to see your success. And this is hugely motivated because you give yourself a second to like really feel those positive feelings associated with the success. So often as adults, it's easy to just get caught in like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next goal? And we don't take that time to really think like, oh my gosh, look what I just did. Look what I just did and how much progress I just made. Even if it's 2 notes, even if it's 1 measure, that's still, you're better than you were 5 minutes or 10 minutes or the day before, right? You made improvement, and that is definitely worthy of success. Now, I've been talking about this a little bit, but to pre-plan your routine together, we're going to be talking about the confidence roadmap. And the confidence roadmap involves every single milestone that you need to hit to play any piece at any level with that confident musical expression. And when I'm talking about these milestones, these are not negotiable things, okay? These are things that you have to hit. And a lot of times people will hear me talk about these things and they'll be like, okay, like I see why that's important, but I'm just going to kind of like skim past that one. Don't do that, okay? Don't do that because it will cause problems later down in the journey. And you might even be at a point in your journey where you're already realizing that. A really big one that people often skim over is counting out loud. And then I get people almost on a daily basis, I would say at least every other day, I get comments on videos or messages from people that are like, oh my gosh, I went back and I relearned this piece with counting out loud because I've never paid attention to rhythm and I've never counted out loud. And the difference that it made, and they have these huge takeaways because they went back to address a milestone that they had skipped earlier in the process. So don't skip them, okay? Don't see those milestones and think like, I can just glaze over that. It will cause problems later, okay? All right, so let's talk about one last analogy that I really want to use to hit home because I'm hoping that one of these will sink in with you. So consistency is very, very, very important. It's important not only in showing up and practicing, however many days you decided that you're going to practice. Consistency is also important in the way that you practice. And where this usually breaks down is with accuracy. People will often really struggle to be consistently accurate. Now, our brains need consistency in order to commit things to memory. So if I'm trying to learn something, let's say I'm taking the first line of a piece of music, I need to play it the same way over and over and over again in order for my brain to remember it. This is true of anything. This is true of like learning how to tie your shoes. This is true of learning any new skill. You have to repeat it in the same way several times before your brain can remember it. Now, where that consistency breaks down is when we start to make mistakes. So let's say I play the first line of the music and I play it totally correctly. I'm like, woohoo, I did it. But then the next time, the second time I play a wrong note. And I'm like, okay, well, let's try again. And the third time I play a wrong note in a different spot. And then the fourth time I play it and I do it all correct. And then the fifth time I play a wrong note in a different spot. I have now played it 5 times completely differently. And that is not consistency. And there is no way for my brain to remember what I did. There's no way for my brain to commit that to memory. So when I go to the piano the next day, I'm confused and I'm likely going to make either those same mistakes or different mistakes because my brain is like, what is happening? It would be like if you were to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you are in an area of the world where you don't know what a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is, it's 2 pieces of bread, peanut butter on one side, jelly on the other. And if I were to set out to learn how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I get the bread out of the cupboard, I get the peanut butter out of the cupboard, I get the jelly out of the fridge, I put the 2 pieces of bread on the counter, I spread the peanut butter, I spread the jelly, I put the bread back in the cupboard, I put the peanut butter back in the cupboard, I put the jelly back in the fridge. I could do that each day, and probably after 3 days, I would remember how to do that. I might even be able to do it without thinking about it. However, let's say I do the first day that way, and then the next day, I put the peanut butter in the bathtub when I'm done, I put the jelly under the sink, and I put the bread in the backyard. When I go on day 3 to make that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, how much harder is it going to be for me to make it? Really, really freaking hard, because if you're like me, you're gonna be like, where did I put that? Where did I put that? And you're gonna have to remember where you put it. You're gonna have to go and get it, and you're gonna have to travel much farther to get it because you put it somewhere that it doesn't belong. And the whole process is going to be confusing. It's going to take a lot longer, and your brain's not going to remember it from day to day. Okay. And so that's a very, very good analogy of how consistent you have to be with your piano practice and how accurate you need to be. And we don't need to be accurate because perfection is the goal. We need to be accurate because our brain needs that consistency in order to truly remember and commit to memory what we do from day to day to day. Okay. And so from this same quiz that I referenced earlier, half of people spend a good portion of their practice just playing through pieces over and over and over again, which can be fun, right? It can be fun, but really what you're doing when you do this and you're not actually like breaking things down, or you're not practicing for that consistent accuracy, is you're putting the peanut butter, the bread, and the jelly in different places every single time you practice. And the scariest part about this is that a lot of adults, even when they have the best of intention, don't realize how much they're doing this. Okay, so we're going to change that for you. We are going to pre-plan tomorrow our routines. We're going to dive into how to do that. And then on day 3, we're going to really go specifically into the methods that you're going to use that are going to help you get that consistent accuracy. Now, I want you today to take what you have learned and think about your biggest ahas. And let's go ahead, let's type it in the chat right now. So go ahead and type in, one second. I'm going to fix my microphone really quick. It started buzzing. Give me just. So sorry about that. Is that a little bit better? Let me know in the chat if you can hear me and if it's still buzzing. Occasionally my connection just gets a little bit funky. Okay, thank you, Mary. So what was I saying? So let's type in the chat what your favorite and biggest aha moment from today was. Let's go ahead and type those in the chat. And then I do want you to think about it a little more in depth. And in your workbook, you should have gotten your workbook if you printed it out or maybe pulled it up on a device. I want you to answer the questions in the workbook. I take you a little bit deeper on some of the things that we talked about in today's session. So why you played the piano and what your biggest goals are, what your biggest aspirations are. Those things are very important to hold closely to your heart. It makes the journey a lot easier and it helps you keep that end goal in mind. And then I also have sections in there for you to write down your biggest aha from today and for you to take some notes. If you want to watch the replay, it's going to go out here in just a little while. And really just take some time and space to let those ahas sink in. Think about how you've been doing things wrong, maybe some of these mistakes that you recognize in your routine, and also what you're excited to change going forward. Okay. And so let's go ahead and check the, okay, consistent accuracy, less is more, less is better. Yes. Critical nature of consistency. These are amazing takeaways. Now, as your action plan for today, I want you to go ahead and go to the Facebook group, which is linked in all of the emails. If you're not in there already, you can find the reminder email for this class. And actually, Kat, if you wouldn't mind putting a link to the Facebook group in the chat, that way, if anybody doesn't have it, we can go ahead and get you in there. And I want you to do a reflection post from day 1. And I want you to share what mistakes you've been making and what your biggest takeaway or aha moment was from today. Okay. And that is your accountability post. That lets me know that you showed up, you were here, you watched this, and you really took the time to let the information sink in and think about how it affects you and what changes you're going to make. And then in addition to writing down the mistakes you've been making and your biggest aha, I want you to find someone else's post and I want you to comment on it and encourage them. And maybe you find someone's post where you're like, we're twins, we've been making the same mistakes, or someone's post where you just resonate with something that you say. And I want you to comment and encourage them so that we can all get to know each other and create that community and really lift each other up. Okay. So today has been fantastic. I know in the chat, thank you so much for sharing. You all have had some amazing ahas. I can't wait to read more about it in the Facebook group. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the routine. We're going to dive even deeper. Today, we touched on the mistakes, but tomorrow you're going to get really the how of how to plan it. And we're going to start to do some of that together. So I cannot wait to see you all tomorrow. I cannot wait to read your accountability posts. Happy practicing. Keep up the incredible work. You are all inspiring, and I'll see you tomorrow. Talk soon, everybody. Bye, everybody.